And I only want to say one thing before I introduce our illustrious, is that a word? Yes. I think it applies to you if it is. Guest, which is, we are recording this, but more importantly, you know, it's a conversation. So if you guys would rather talk to each other, go somewhere else. But during this conversation, which I'm guessing will last, what do you want to do? At 45 minutes to an hour, 9 hours. We will do a Q&A. So if you have a question, you think of it at any point, hold on to it, and I'll definitely throw it out to you. And then I'll just ask that you grab this mic from me so that your question gets recorded. But that's it. All right. And now the kids have arrived. So I am very, very excited that the gentleman who is joined me so many times in the past, and that he is here tonight because the last time I had the pleasure of interviewing him live, he mentioned, of course, that he's in Rochester, where he now is at the Rochester, University of Rochester, Rochester Institute of Technology, and which is far better. And they said, well, invite him to Farm Jam. And I said, I'm not going to invite David Cay Johnston to Farm Jam. And someone said, why not? I'm so glad I did. I'm so glad I accepted. I'm so glad that you and your lovely bride, Janet, joined us. And I thank you very much for being here. David Cay Johnston, everybody.
Well,
and I'll give you a proper intro. But, yes, what were you going to say? I'm sorry.
Well, the audience ought to know that we're sitting here in this farm. There are animals around. There are a lot of bee hives nearby. And there are people who came here from Anchorage, Alaska, Ventura, California, Stone Mountain, Georgia, Winchester, Virginia, all over just for this, Las Vegas, just to come see you, not me, to see you, which is, I think, an astonishing set of praise for, how you've turned comedy into serious business on public policy.
That's very, very kind of you, and I will only say about that, and as I was telling your wife, the issues that you know as much about as anybody in this country are hard to get people engaged on. My whole goal has been to fight apathy my whole career, which is why The Daily Show and the Colbert Report taught me that people can learn and care about things if they're delivered in an effective way. But the way that you actually communicate doesn't require an interlocutor. You're so good at communicating all of these issues because you're so smart and articulate at it. So I am so excited to have you here and to throw these questions. And I hope to argue vehemently with you about economic policy and trade policy, but specifically tax policy and some of the theories around modern monetary theory.
I should thank you for something.
I don't know what any of those words mean, by the way. I should mention also the words I just said.
First time I was on with you on Sirius XM, where you had asked me if I'd come over, so I walked over. I thought I was still at the New York Times when it happened, but I may have been in New York for some other reason. And you and I got to speak a little bit, and I said, well, the nice thing about watching The Daily Show and Colbert Report is clearly young people are following the news and they understand it. And you looked at me like I was a complete blithering idiot and said something along the lines of, you're not listening carefully. They are explaining what the news is that the young people haven't read, so they'll see the laughter in it.
That sounds smart. I said that?
You said that.
I'm impressed with you.
I have told that story 100 times in the year since.
That's the whole theory. And I'll only say this. When you said they're come here for me, I want to make it very, very clear. What I'm trying to do and what I'd like to get, and maybe I'll have this be my first question to you, is the paradigm that we're in now, the state that we're in now, the country that we're in now, we didn't really expect.
We're in New York, in case you're not clear.
Well, but we're still in America. And still in America. And a lot of these people live in states where they don't have now as many rights. To me, the most important thing that we can all do right now, we're not going to change this overnight, maybe not for a long time. The most important thing we can do is build community and help folks out that need help, especially marginalized folks. And to me, that's the job right now, is do whatever you can for the least amongst us as well as your close friends. Make new friends, network, and we've learned this from plenty of human civilizations in the past, but my thing is building community within whatever you want to call this, authoritarianism, fascism, late stage, whatever, So
Whatever
Bill-
those things mean.
what any of those mean. This is our community, a very small part of it, but people who, and that's what we're trying to do, and I think that's important. Do you think that's important, community?
Not only do I think it's important, but we have been digging ourselves into this since about 1975. Certainly since 1981 when Ronald Reagan was elected, and people said, gee, all that prosperity from the New Deal, let's reject that in favor of more money for the wealthiest among us and long-term degradation of our economic standards.
Right.
Of course, they didn't know that's what they were doing. It was just what they did. And because it took us at least 45 years to get into this, it's going to take a while to get out of this, assuming we get out of it, which is not certain. And I would suggest that there are some words, and I'll try and think of some others in the next 45 minutes, that we should keep in mind. But one of them is regard. A hallmark of the Trumpers is they have no regard for other people. They don't care about other people. And by other people, I mean anybody who isn't just like who they imagine themselves to be.
Well said, yeah.
And so regard is a very important word we need to put back as much as we can. I teach my RIT students in the journalism classes I teach. I also teach criminal justice and soon political science and law. That if you don't have regard for people you can't stand, you're really not standing up for any of the Bill of Rights. You have to defend the rights of people who you just cannot stand, because if they don't have rights, you don't have rights. As Donald said the other day, a lot of millions of people are saying it'd be good to have a dictatorship, or essentially words to that effect. I don't know. Have you heard anybody in the audience here among people people who are Trumpers? Yes, we need a dictatorship.
Well, I think they do want it, but they don't call it that. They want daddy.
They want daddy.
They
yes.
want as many. There are certain people amongst us. I can look out and see some of them, the whites, and they want as many cops on the streets because they feel safer. They like the military on their streets. They like that. They want it, and they're fine with it. And that's what he means when he says some of these people would love. I'm doing stuff without any checks and balances, separation of powers. Screw it. Executive order is equal to the law. Cops in Chicago, they like it, they want it, and that's how other countries have done it. And now I'm daddy.
Yeah, boy,
That
that's
felt
like,
amazing.
That's like the worst possible daddy you could get would be the only worse daddy than Donald Trump would be Donald Trump's real father.
Wow, that's our clip.
What about Junior?
Junior is a pretty bad dad too. Yeah, it's a good point. So let me change.
What?
Oh, wow. Let's just get this out of the way. This is a unique thing. Like I found you through your books. Perfectly Legal and Free Lunch changed my mind, changed my life. I was in the audience, the way that those books, specifically the fine print as well, which came third, I think, in that series, the way they resonated, that's my whole thing, is how do people like what we're talking about? They love David Cay Johnston, and they love those two books, especially particularly. And I learned so much about America and tax policy and economic policy and wealth issues, and that's where I found you. But I didn't know that you were such good friends with Donald Trump. So tell us, you've written books about him as well, but you also know the man, in case people don't know this, and you tell us about your relationship with the current president of the United States. And what does he smell like? I would imagine.
Well, fortunately, I haven't been around him lately, so I don't know, but there is a meme on the internet you can find of when he met with the European leaders and Zelensky, and you'll notice many of them clearly
Seem
trying.
noxious.
Yes, they clearly something smells very bad, and it's troubling them, and you can't miss it if you
Well, I've heard
zero in on them.
got some struggles, but your relationship with him is
Well,
professional.
yes. In 1988, I left the LA Times after 12 years, and I went to Atlantic City for the Philadelphia Inquirer to write about the gambling industry, which I believed casinos were about to spread across the country because of a 1987 Supreme Court decision that indigenous peoples, in many cases, not all of them, were entitled to have a casino. And that's what happened. And I met Donald Trump 2 or 3 days in, and then understanding he was the only interesting casino person in town, because the owners, the rest of them, were corporations, and they hired boring suits to run the places. And immediately I was told by Donald's own executives, who decided right away they could trust me, that he was a complete fraud and utter incompetent. He was always interfering in the business. He was lowering profits and then yelling at them. And he was extracting cash as fast as he could out of the enterprises. Of course, if you're a smart businessman, you're trying to create wealth, you reinvest in the business, you upgrade things. When your hotel is 5 years old, you replace the mattresses, and instead of paint, you put wallpaper on the walls.
Right.
And he didn't do any of that. In fact, I stayed in Trump Plaza Casino for one night, not long before it was blown up and torn down. And it had the built-in furniture, all had wood putty patches with paint that didn't match. The sofa was lumpy and uncomfortable to sleep on. It was almost a flea bag because of the way that he ran his business. So anyway,
Covered in gold, though.
no, actually not.
Oh.
Covered in
Mold.
Covered in a color, a version of yellow that I generally refer to as vulture vomit.
Oh.
Volvo used to have that color. And
Or Trump urine, but take your choice.
And anyway, when I spoke to Donald's guys and then to the regulators, they all kept telling me he didn't know what he was doing. And I kept saying, the man owns 2 casinos. How can he not know what he's doing? And with the connivance of his guys, I wrote 4 questions about the gambling business, all of which were premised on a falsehood. And I sit down with Donald for a long interview in June of 1988. And when I bring up these falsities, he just runs with them. He just assumes they're true. And as I'm listening to him, I go to myself, because we just moved from California, right? California was flooded with these TV ads. Is your husband going to leave you? Is your boyfriend having an affair with your sister? Call California Psychics. We're the real deal, and we can tell you. And I thought, this guy should be on California Psychics. He's really into, telling you what he thinks you want to hear.
And now he's president.
And now, because he's been very good at telling people what they think they want to hear. And, there's seething anger in this country, as there should be, over what we've done to people. And let me give you a couple of numbers. I know that turns people off, but a couple of numbers that sort of illustrate that. In 2016, the year Donald first won not the popular vote, but the Electoral College, the bottom 90% of Americans made as much money as people made in 1973, adjusted for inflation, through the end of November, through Thanksgiving. They basically went the last month of the year with no money. Now, add on the fact that if you had a pension in 1973, and about 45% of workers did, and you had health care, which was more than half of workers back then, that used to be on top of your salary, called a fringe benefit. Now it mostly comes out of your paycheck. So take that into account, and people only got paid until Halloween. So compared to 1973, in 2016, people were only getting paid for the first 10 months of the year. No wonder they were angry and going, what's going on? And that's what my series of books you mentioned on the economy, Perfectly Legal on Taxes, Free Lunch on Subsidies to Big Corporations and Some Select Individuals, and the fine print about suppressing competition were all about. And so Americans are legitimately angry, but they're looking at the wrong place. They think that unions are the problem. They think that Democrats are the problem. I've tried to explain to many Trumpers that the last 2 presidents who produced budget surpluses were Bill Clinton for 4 years, and if you adjust for Social Security, all 8 years, and Mr. Guns and Butter himself, Lyndon Baines Johnson.
Right.
Not true. No, that can't be true. It's just complete rejection of the facts. And we live in a society now where everybody thinks, oh, I have the internet. I know more than my doctor does.
We do our own research here as a community.
Right.
I would like to announce no one here is vaxxed. Did I tell you that? I kid. It's what I'm hearing you say is what I think you've helped identify throughout your career is like there are serious problems, injustices with the way our economic system works. It is rigged against you by these people. And there are real problems, but also what they've done a great job at, what Trump and Republicans, frankly, have done is they've identified the wrong roots and the wrong causes.
Right.
For example, immigrants and poor folks and so on. So there is a problem, but they've convinced so many people through right-wing media especially that the problem, for example, with the financial crisis was that poor folks were buying homes they couldn't afford as opposed to deregulation to dispense with a larger...
No, stop you, Pete.
Correct me if I'm wrong.
There is no
How
such
dare
thing
you.
as deregulation.
I said
There
a
is
word I shouldn't
only
have said.
re-regulation, which
Well done.
overwhelmingly means on behalf of the big companies against the consumer.
Oh, that's good.
Re-regulation.
That's good
Don't-
stuff.
Anybody says deregulation, nonsense.
Oh, I like that.
But I want to give you another number that goes to this, all right?
good.
After my trilogy came out, not because of it, just factually after it, the RAND Corporation, the think tank in California started by the Air Force and Boeing, did a study of, well, what was going on in the American economy. From 1974, the year after I mentioned, 73.
The year before I was born.
God, I have children, almost all my children are older than you.
be 50,
Yeah. And 2018. What happened and what Rand found is that had we kept the income distribution of 1973, in 2018, the bottom 90% of Americans' incomes would have been 2/3 larger. Now, you want to make a whole bunch of social pathologies go away, people tweaking on meth, which you find any little town you drive across the Midwest, people who are, alcoholics because they can't cope with the life around them, people who are angry and short-tempered and, beat their kids and things like that.
All kinds of
Add
struggles.
67% to their income, and a lot of that, not all of it, but a lot of it goes away.
Well said,
And
yeah.
the total amount of money Rand calculated that was redistributed to the top 10, they focused on the top 10%. The real gains are in the top 10th of 1%, 1 in 1,000 households. $50 trillion over close to 50 years. $50 trillion over close to 50 years. That's the core issue here. And the Republicans, at least certainly since Reagan, I could make a pretty good case all the way back to the end of World War II, have had a consistent economic view of America. The reason there aren't more jobs, the reason there isn't more prosperity, is that the rich don't have enough. They're not investing as much as they could. They're not doing those things that create jobs. And so we need to get them more money. And there are two ways to do this. One of them is you reduce the taxes on the people at the top. But the other way is you take away from children, the disabled, the elderly, and the sick. And why them? They can't fight back. That's why. They rely on proxies like us to fight back. And so then, pursuant to the memo by Lewis Powell, before he became a Supreme Court justice, known as the Powell Memo, which if you haven't heard of it, just go on the internet, type Powell Memo in, and read it. Brilliant, brilliant document. Evil document, but brilliant. He said, if we're going to have business be in charge in America, we have to get rid of the unions. We've got to get rid of the social justice movements, which were largely run by churches and other religious institutions. And we have to turn people, into worker bees who will be compliant. We got to shut down serious journalism. It's all laid out in this memo. And if you look at our history since he wrote that memo in the 1960s, in reaction, by the way, to the fact that the most popular man in America was Ralph Nader.
A consumer advocate.
Yes.
That's why he was popular. For advocating for humans, putting profit.
And the only reason I'm
behind
here
people.
today with my wife, Jennifer Leonard, is Ralph Nader. I went to speak at Ithaca College, which is 40 miles from here, 2014, and we got in my brand new Volkswagen to drive back on a beautiful Sunday morning, bright clear sky in western New York, which is a surprisingly wonderful place to live. I would never have imagined until we moved here. And suddenly both of us see this huge black thing. It's like a barbell with heavy weight at each end coming right at the windshield. And both of us, when we spoke of it later, Jennifer's nodding her head, had the exact same reaction. I gripped the wheel as tightly as I could and put my foot on the brake, figuring want to slow the car down. Probably why it hit the windshield instead of going over the car. And we both thought, that's it. We were certain we were dead. Instead, we just had a totally shattered windshield. Had we been driving in a car that had the quote-unquote safety glass before Ralph Nader came along and said, hey, this safety glass is routinely slashing people's throats, cutting their jugular vein, in a few cases virtually taking their heads off, we would have been dead. And I wrote a column at the time about, we owe our lives to Ralph Nader. So yeah, he was enormously popular, and all sorts of things that we have today, like what are the contents of the cereal you're eating that has Robert F. Kennedy all worked up because he doesn't know what riboflavin is? Oh, they have this thing called riboflavin. See it? It's like, and these other ones I can't pronounce, Riboflavin, by the way, is vitamin B2.
There you go.
And so there's been this didn't happen out of nowhere. Well, thank goodness I've done something useful today.
I've been stocking up on riboflavin supplements for. Well, hold on.
But this happened over through a dedicated effort over a long period of time, and the labor unions did not understand what to do, and they didn't fight back, and they didn't understand economics. Trust me, I've spent a lot of time with labor leaders, and it's very clear they did not go to business school. And so getting out of this requires some big changes. Respect for other people, regard, revival of unions. And as Pope Francis said in 2014, without unions, there is no economic justice.
Well said, and I fully agree. And I want to just bring you back because you said Ralph Nader, and that came out of the Powell memo, and just underscoring, if people don't know about that, I should have done hours on it, and it's a very important point. I want to talk to you about, I could talk to you about economics and finance and the history of political economy for 3 hours, and that's maybe the thing
I thought we were going to talk till the sun rose.
We've got, hopefully we'll be talking by the time the man who owns the farm comes home. He's not here yet, but we can just talk about that. We can also talk about, and I want to talk to you about journalism and the state of media today, because you know that as well as anybody. You're an expert on that. There's one question I haven't asked you pointedly, and one thing I wanted to get you to talk about in front of this diverse group of people is throughout all of your work, and certainly through all the interviews I've always done, you've always had a great and deep understanding for the history of oppression, specifically when it comes to race and gender in this country. You've always been very inclusive the way you talked, in a way that really taught me how, when talking about economics, when talking about finance, making sure to include black and brown folks, the history of America, and certainly women and gender in general. And my question to you is, who radicalized you, old timer?
That's
because you always include this, and I think it's so important. It probably was important at your time, your tenure at the New York Times. But
I literally mean what I'm going to say very, very clearly. Nobody has ever asked that question before, which has always surprised me. So I'm glad that you asked it. I grew up in a very unusual household. My mother was a disowned heiress. My maternal grandfather had one child, my mother, and in today's money, when he died in the mid-50s, and I was a kindergartner or first grader, he was worth $250 million. He was fabulously rich. And so my mother grew up with servants and lots of money, and on her 16th birthday, as she graduated from high school, she got as a gift a Cadillac. And
I got a Plymouth Reliant cake car, $900.
And my mother complained all the time when I was growing up that women are chattel property if they're married. They can't do anything without their husband's permission and approval. You can't open a bank account.
It was true, though.
Yeah, and there were no credit cards back then. But you couldn't do anything without your husband, and it was, why are we chattel property? And my father, who was a 100% disabled veteran of World War II and was a chef, what passed in the day for a celebrity chef, even though he was disabled, he worked until he couldn't, and then he died when I was 20 years old. And my father had grown up in New Orleans. And when he was 13 years old, he was suddenly told he could no longer play with black children. Standard practice. And he was livid about this. And just before he turned 19 years old in 1929, a couple of months before the Great Depression began, he went out west and stayed because he said, I can't do anything about the racism. When I was about fourth grade, if my father was home at dinner time, which was not the norm, he would get my younger brother and I, stand us in front of the TV when the John Cameron Swayze Camel Caravan of News sold by the cigarette company would come on. And when they got to whatever the civil rights story was, and he would say, stand in front of the TV, and he'd put his hands on the back of our necks, and we would see Bull Connors turning dogs and water fountains on people and things like that. And he would turn the TV off, and he'd look at us and say, this cannot continue. You will not allow this. There, but for the grace of God, go you. You could have been born poor and black in the South, and you need to see the world as if you'd been born poor and black in the South, because this is wrong. And when I was 14, he sent me to New Orleans to be with my relatives for the summer with specific instructions that I was to
14 years, that's when it happened.
I was to be in their faces about their racism. And sure enough, I arrived, and the first thing my well-to-do uncle had to take his Mercedes down to be worked on, and we drove to the dealership. And New Orleans is a poor city, understand? And I made a beeline for the water fountain that said colored. And immediately this set off alarms with the family. And eventually they told me that I was touched in the head. But they were completely blind to what racism? What? There's no racism. What are you talking about? As we would sit inside their summer cabin on Lake Pontchartrain having lunch, and the man who worked for us and was doing yard work had to sit outside with the wasps and eat lunch. And I said, well, why don't we bring, I don't remember the gentleman's name, but why don't we bring him into the house? And so all of this had a very profound effect on my seeing things. And my parents were very open-minded. When I was 8 years old, I knew what a Boston marriage is. How many people in this audience, of about 50 people, know what a Boston marriage is? A couple. It was a euphemism for lesbians living together. And I knew this when I was 8 years old. I knew gay men because my parents were just very open to other people, and they had regard for other people. And we've got to get regard into our philosophy. And anybody who tells you they're a Christian and doesn't have regard, well, they're something, but they're not a Christian. And you know, Pete, that there are literally ministers who have publicly said that their parishioners have come to them and said, why are you teaching this turn the other cheek Sermon on the Mount nonsense from Jesus? We want Donald Trump. Hit him in the face. You want to believe that? You can believe that. I'll defend your right to believe it, but you're not a Christian. And I'm not either.
I was offended by that last part. Before you go on to talk about hypocrisy, I just want to take a moment to give your parents their flowers. I'm so glad I asked you. That is a round of applause for that story. I'm so glad. I'd never heard you tell that. I never knew you spent your summer of 14 in New Orleans, which is fascinating.
That was the summer of the march, Martin Luther King March, that Philip Randolph organized, along with, I'm sorry, I've forgotten the name of, Bayard Rustin. They organized the big march, and one New Orleans TV station ran it. And I was sitting in my uncle and aunt's home watching this on TV and calling out to the maid, Miss whoever was I called her, who always had to call me Master David. And I said, hey, come look at this. Oh, hey, look at this. Philip Randolph's going to get to talk. And about 11:50, she walks in front of me, between me and the TV, and she says, Master David, you have to turn that off now. I said, what are you talking about? It's just getting really going. She says, your Uncle Charlie and his business friends are coming into here in the dining room. They had a formal dining room. And they're having lunch, and I will be in terrible trouble if that is on the television set. And I went, oh, my God. And I got up and I turned it off, and I thought, how unbelievably horrible, because she would have been in big trouble for letting me watch that.
Quick pause. Food is out, I believe, yes. And I want you to go.
Thanks for watching. See you.
I want you as quiet as you can, go serve yourself. And go ahead. Go up there and get your food if you want. If you can wait, then wait. But I'm going to do part 3, which is about media and your views on what you've seen. And then I'm going to do Q&A, and then we're going to wrap it. So if you have a question,
So the sun isn't going to rise.
I want to. I'll take you as long as you can, but I want to make sure everybody eats and everybody's comfortable and so on. And just take a quick pause, a round of applause for Kitty and Keith and Mike, of course, for helping out. Thank you for doing all the food. You're so generous and kind. And they are just an amazing part of our listening community, and that's what this is. And then also the celebrities have arrived. That is my mom and my dad. Mr. David Cay Johnston. My mom and my dad are here. My dad loves the attention. Don't let him kid you.
What about the steers and the pigs and the chickens? Are we going to applaud for them?
Well, they're on their way. So finally, I want to ask you, I think it's super important, as we're talking about all the things that you know a lot about, you know as much as anything about media and the coverage of all the issues that we are talking about. Just a little bit about, because you've done it all, every kind of media, print, television, radio, and you've won all the awards and you've got all the respect and you're at the New York Times for 17 years and so on. But what we are seeing now, this media atmosphere now, I'll start the conversation by saying, anything you want to believe, keep it quiet, folks, anything you want to believe, you can believe. In this America, in this version of America, you can believe whatever you want to believe. Vaccines don't work, the moon is made of cheese, anything you want.
Green cheese,
you can find it. You, however, have taught us to live on Earth One my entire career, come back to data and journalism and how it's done and how it becomes reliable and how it gains credibility. You've got all the credibility and respect that journalists can have. Tell us a little bit about how far you've come.
Well, I mean,
Go eat, everybody. Get your food.
Yeah, get your food, as a few people are starting to do.
Yeah.
Understand what journalism is and isn't. Journalism is an accurate recounting of the official version of events, and in America, unlike a totalitarian state like Russia, the official criticisms of the official version of events. I'm in the unofficial business. So when you see a newscast or hear on the radio or pick up in the newspaper, the president said X, Boeing announced the following, the mayor produced his budget. You're going to read an accurate account of what those facts are. And you will read, when the mayor announces his budget, people who don't like the mayor and the city council, they'll be gone and ask, what do you think of the mayor's budget? What's wrong with it? And you'll get a good, reasonable accounting of that. But we have a couple of new and troubling developments. Ever since we allowed Rupert Murdoch to become a citizen, we have had news organizations, notably Fox, notice I only call it Fox, one word, that are in the business of lying to you. And anybody who doubts that, Fox just paid $787.5 million for knowingly, intentionally lying to their audience about one of the software voting system companies. And they have another lawsuit that they haven't been able to settle where they want $2 billion for the same thing. And Fox often pretzels facts. There's technically what they said is what's in the news, but they have turned around to make black, white, up, down, red, blue. And that's been a terrible challenge in this country because they have figured out at Fox and One News America and Breitbart, these other places, how to appeal to your biases and how to do so in a way that resonates with people. If you're thinking, I'm not going to read the New York Times anymore because I didn't like this or that story, that's a huge mistake and a huge benefit to Donald Trump and the people like him who want to end our democracy. News is not about telling you what you want to hear. It is not about comforting you. It is about telling you what, in our judgment as journalists, you need to know. It is exclusion. We have limited resources. Even if you have the New York Times or LA Times staffs when I worked there of 1,200 journalists, you still can't do everything. There's not enough space to do everything. There's enough time. This is important. We're going to tell you about this. That isn't important. We're going to not tell you about that. And journalists are unique in another area that's very important. There's an old saying, I once spent money having somebody research, where's the first time you could find what I'm about to say in print? And it came back to be me, and I am sure I was not the first person to say it. I was floored. But the saying is, doctors bury their mistakes, lawyers see theirs off to prison. Only journalists sign theirs on the front page for everyone to read. And we publish journalism reviews. There used to be a lot of them around the country. Now we have basically the Columbia Journalism Review at Columbia University. And these are internal critiques where, I've written many pieces for journalism reviews exposing reporting that was fraudulent, reporting that editors failed to properly check before they put it in. And no other occupation does that. It is a unique self-policing matter. And oftentimes, competitive newspapers in particular, what we hardly have anymore, will go after each other's work. When I'm the only journalist in America who has caused a broadcaster to be forced to shut down and go out of business over what today we would call fake news. I called it blackouts and news manipulations. And I'm writing these stories in the Detroit Free Press, and lo and behold, the Detroit News writes stories basically saying, don't believe that. Or it's known as the Lansing State Journal. Don't believe that stuff. And so, I have a long history of being a press critic, and there are plenty of journalists who don't like me because of that. That's okay. They're entitled. But journalism now doesn't have nearly the resources we had. At the LA Times, when I turned in my very first expense account in 1976, I was chided for flying coach and for renting a Pinto. Well, after that, trust me, I flew first class and rented Oldsmobiles all the time. And there were years when my expense account was multiples of my salary at the paper because we had money running out our ears and we could pursue stories in great depth. I wrote a long feature once about the thrift store business and how, because Fortune magazine had described one of the biggest charities in the country as being the most efficient charity in the country because they didn't understand it was arguably the least efficient charity in the country because they didn't know the economics of it. And when I finished the piece and turned it in, an editor said, "But I want this fact you'd mentioned a long time ago." And I said, I don't think it's worth it. And he said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, to do that, it's going to take, 2 weeks of work. I got to fly back to the East Coast. It's going to be $10,000 of expenses." And he goes, "Yeah. Try to get $10,000 of expenses today for a whole story."
Try to get a job as a journalist and be able to pay your rent.
Oh, absolutely.
Today.
And I tell young people who want to go into journalism, what you need to do is marry someone who will support your hobby.
That's sad, but funny.
In 1967, I was recruited by the San Jose Mercury by somebody who didn't know when they started recruiting me that I was 18 and had just graduated from Knight High School. I got hired the next year at 19, appalling some of the staff, at least in the first. And my salary in today's money was $67,000.
Your first year.
A teenager. And with overtime, I was making about $84,000, $7,000 a month. I talk to young journalists all the time who tell me they've gotten their first job offer and it's $32,000 in today's money. And this isn't just journalists. Airline pilots who were senior captains of jumbo jets in the mid to late 70s were making well over $1 million a year in today's money. Now they make less than $500,000. The whole country has seen wages come down. Well, we keep minting billionaires and centimillionaires, and many people just have more money than they know what to do with. And this is government policy that's bringing these things about. So journalism isn't left out of that. Journalism is a part of that. And in Washington, the problem is Washington journalism, and I've never worked in Washington, is embarrassed Washington reporters a lot over the years, but not living there. A lot of the work there depends on access. And, you could do a lot of work by reading the Federal Register and paying attention to the paperwork that comes out of the White House, which Charlie Savage of the New York Times won his Pulitzer for doing. But it depends on, I got this line from the senator. The cabinet secretary pulled me aside and whispered something in my ear.
Right.
And that just does not lead to the kind of skeptical, from a distance reporting. And a lot of it, I read stories all the time in the Wall Street Journal about finance. And I go, this is a very well-written story. It makes perfect sense to me. And the writer of this story doesn't have a clue to what's actually going on because they don't have any deep knowledge. And as the salaries go down, the quality of people over the long haul is going to go down, except for those who either have trust funds. And there are a lot of journalists these days with trust funds, so they don't have the kind of experience I had growing up of, going to work at 10 and full-time at 13. And, literally, I once had an editor at the New York Times this was in 1996, so the numbers would have changed. But I said, think about these poor families in New York who are raising their kids on $500 a week, $26,000 a year. Nobody in New York lives on $26,000 a year. I said, get on the subway with me. I'll take you out to Queens on my way to get on the airplane to fly back to Rochester. Oh, well, nobody cares about those people. And you can find that at every major news organization now, because you're getting people who grew up, with a silver spoon in their mouth.
Yep.
I mean, the current editor of the New York Times, Joe Kahn, who's an excellent journalist. I used to sit a couple of desks away from him when he was a reporter. He's a gazillionaire.
Not to
He's
mention
incredibly rich.
the rest of them.
And it affects
LA
how you
Times.
see the world. It affects how you see the world, because reasonably, if you're Diana Henriquez and your grandfather was a coal miner and your father worked for the coal mine company, just wouldn't go into the mines underground, you have a different view of the world than if, you grew up in a house with servants and a private jet.
Your institutional knowledge and life experience brought to the table all this credibility for your career as a journalist, and we are all better for it because you have been covering it in the way that you described your entire career. And I'm going to go to Q&A now. If anybody has any questions.
Just one. Don't stop paying attention to the news. If you're ticked off about something, be ticked off about it. We're not here to comfort you. We're here to tell you what we think is important. That's the one bias
like
we're
that.
allowed. This is important. That isn't. You're not going to like things. And in the words of my friend Seymour Hersh, who's one of the greatest investigative reporters ever, you pick up the front page of the New York Times, you can read the greatest journalism human beings have ever produced. Move over one column, pure crap.
By the way, some of the people that are here have said, I love your show, I love what you're doing, but I can't listen that much anymore because I can't take the news. You would tell them they should be listening to the show, right, David?
1 million people died for this country. Don't tell me you can't stomach the news.
Oh, wow, that's profoundly impactful. All right, so Q&A, if anybody has any questions, otherwise we're going to just go eat, and maybe we can come back to it. But does anybody want to ask a question desperately? Could you please come up and say on the microphone so that because I'm recording it, it will catch it. Ladies and gentlemen, it has just been her birthday. Give it up for Vicky.
Hi, and I'm also your tour guide on Farm Jam. My question is, I've run into articles that were clearly written by AI because most of the facts in them have been grossly incorrect. How do you see